Hi, it's Katrina. My friend David is going to be helping me out with the voiceover today, so I hope you enjoy.
Number 8. The Soyuz 11. In the history of space travel, only 3 men have died off this planet. The 3 astronauts perished as part of the Soyuz 11 mission in 1971. The original purpose of the Soyuz project, which started years earlier in 1967, was to get a Russian cosmonaut on the moon. But when America beat the Soviets to the lunar surface, they switched gears. The Soviets decided that they'd use their resources to focus on space stations orbiting the planet. On June 6, 1971, Soyuz 11 launched in the Soyuz 7K OKS spacecraft. But just 3 days before the launch, Soviet doctors were concerned that Alexei Leonov, the lead astronaut, had tuberculosis. It turned out to be nothing but a pollen allergy, but it didn't matter. Mission Control already switched the main crew with the backup crew. Alexei and his astronauts were put on the bench, and a less experienced team took their place. The team consisted of Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev. Their goal was to dock their spaceship at the Salyut-1 space station. The last crew of the Soyuz 10 had tried to accomplish this, but the door malfunctioned and they couldn't get inside. Soyuz 10 was a big failure, but the team of the Soyuz 11 were successful. Although it took 3 hours, they were able to dock and enter the space station. The mission went well enough until the astronauts tried to return to Earth. They were about 100 miles above the planet when the entry vehicle separated from the crew capsule. It was standard procedure in preparation for the landing, but when it happened, Mission Control lost contact with the astronauts. Those on the ground had no idea what was happening with the astronauts in their capsule, so all they could do was wait until it touched back down on Earth. The capsule made a perfect touchdown in Kazakhstan. Unfortunately, though, all 3 astronauts were dead inside. Rescuers opened the capsule to find the cosmonauts bleeding from their noses and ears. Their skin had turned blue and was terribly discolored. Apparently, the 3 men had died from asphyxiation from vacuum exposure. They passed out in their spacecraft within about 15 seconds and were dead before they'd made it through the atmosphere. The only silver lining was that their deaths came quickly, before their brains started leaking out through their ears and noses. And now for number 7. But first, I wanted to give a big shout out to Daniel, Holland, and Greg. Thanks so much for watching and supporting OE. I'm so happy to hear that you love the sound of my voice, because this channel posts new videos every single day. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. Number 7. The Philadelphia Experiment. The Philadelphia Experiment is a tale about a ship that disappeared and reappeared. At 5:15 p.m. on October 28, 1943, the USS Eldridge vanished in the port of Philadelphia. But several minutes later, the United States Navy destroyer reappeared several hundred miles north in Norfolk. Then, in a flash of green light, it disappeared and landed back in Philadelphia. The whole thing took just a few seconds, and only a small number of people were aware of what happened. Rumor at the time was that the US Army was creating a technology that could make ships invisible on enemy radar. They tested the technology out at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. Those who were there that day supposedly saw a greenish glow surround the hull of the USS Eldridge in the moments before it vanished. The ship was then seen briefly in Norfolk, Virginia, before it was back in Philadelphia. The personnel who were on board the Eldridge that day supposedly suffered illness for the rest of their lives. They were afflicted by strange diseases, and some of them even fused together with the ship during teleportation. As a result, the technology was deemed too volatile, and the US government ditched it. At least, that's the legend. The official story is that the green glow seen by witnesses was an electric storm. Scientists have blamed it on a weather phenomenon in which plasma created within a strong electric field looks like a brightly glowing green hue, similar to that of an electric fire. The US Navy was testing out something to help their ships avoid radar, but they say it was nothing more than scrambling magnetic signatures using a degaussing technique, hence the electric field. But who do you think is telling the truth? Is it possible the US military really developed teleportation technology by accident? Let us know what you think down below. Number 6. PanAm Flight 914. PanAm Flight 914 is said to have taken off from New York City in 1955 with 57 passengers aboard, but mysteriously, it disappeared from radar and wasn't seen again for 30 years. Then, in 1985, the plane touched down in Miami as if it had never been missing. And those on board had no idea they'd been gone for 3 decades. Without any logical way to explain what happened, the strange case was quickly swept under the rug. The government couldn't possibly have the public knowing that entire planes were being swallowed for decades at a time. So when the story ran in a notorious tabloid paper known as the Weekly World News in 1985, it was dismissed as a ridiculous piece of fiction. The newspaper was famous for running stories about time travelers and the discoveries of giant skeletons. They released the story of PanAm Flight 914 again in 1993 and 1999. However, many think the tabloid newspaper was ripping off an episode of The Twilight Zone from 1961. But what if they were telling a real story? What if there really was a flight that got sucked into a time travel portal and came out on the other side 30 years later? Surely stranger things have happened. But if this story is true, the government has covered it up well. Number 5. Kyle Clink Scales. In 1976, Auburn University student Kyle Clink Scales left his job at a bar to go home. It was a cold night in January when Kyle made his way to his car and drove off into the dark. And after that, he was never seen again. For a long time, the police assumed he'd been murdered. They even caught the person they thought killed Kyle, but they were wrong. After Kyle disappeared, his family was distraught. His parents offered rewards for his safe return. They also consulted psychics and gave the police DNA samples. There was a close call in 1981 when a random guy in Oregon claimed he had amnesia. He thought he might be the Clink Scales' son, but all the leads this generated were dead ends. And unfortunately, Kyle's father died in 2007, never knowing what happened to his boy. In 1996, an anonymous tipster claimed that a friend of Jimmy Earl Jones knew where Kyle's body was. The police drained a lake near the guy's property but never found anything. The person denied any involvement, and so did Jimmy Jones. Then in 2005, an unknown person called Kyle's parents and said that they witnessed his death. The caller claimed that Kyle was put in a barrel covered in concrete and dumped in a pond. The unidentified caller also said that the man responsible for the murder was Jimmy Jones. Jones was questioned multiple times from 1996 to 2005. He frequently gave conflicting statements, and in 2005, he was charged with concealing a death. Jones admitted that he saw Kyle the night he disappeared. He said some of his acquaintances shot Kyle to death. But every time the cops asked him what happened, Jones told them a different story. Nobody was ever charged with the murder, although Jones has remained a top suspect. Almost half a century after the disappearance, a 1974 Pinto was revealed in the murky water of a creek in Alabama. According to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the car belonged to Kyle Clink Scales, and inside the vehicle, investigators found about 50 bone fragments. Sheriff James Woodruff from Troup County said Kyle could have driven off the road on his way home from work. Donnie Turner, on the other hand, who was sheriff until 2012, holds the firm belief that Kyle was murdered. Turner believes Jimmy Earl Jones was there and that he's been lying to the cops for almost 50 years. But the truth is that nobody knows what really happened to Kyle in his car that night. Maybe he was killed, but there's also the possibility that he accidentally wrecked his car, which resulted in his death. Until more information becomes available, there's just no way to know for sure. Number 4. The Interstellar Traveler. Granger Taylor was obsessed with space travel and aliens, and he was 32 years old on a dark and stormy night in 1980 when he left behind a note. The note said that he'd gone to board an alien spaceship, and he's been missing ever since. Granger lived in the small town of Duncan on Vancouver Island in Canada. Locals called him a genius, a brilliant mechanic who had an unhealthy obsession with all things out of this world. He even built himself a replica of a spaceship on his property. Then, in 1980, he started telling people he'd been in contact with aliens. They'd supposedly invited him on an interstellar voyage. In the note that the man left for his parents, it said that he was leaving for 42 months across the universe and that he'd return at a later time. Granger claimed that the aliens were speaking to him through his dreams, and while that may sound like the ramblings of someone losing their mind, those close to Granger didn't suspect that anything was wrong with him. He may have lived an unconventional life on a farm, but those who knew him believed Granger to be rational and sane. He was a skilled mechanic who took on projects like restoring a derelict steam locomotive. He even rebuilt a World War II fighter plane. Right before Granger vanished, he visited the local diner to say goodbye to his friends. He told everyone he was going to space, but they all laughed at him and shrugged it off. His stepbrother Douglas was so convinced that he went out on his boat and looked up in the sky to see if Granger was there somewhere in a UFO. The mystery endured until 1986, when a local forestry worker discovered the remains of a destroyed truck northwest of town. At the scene, the police found dynamite, fragments of human bone, and a scrap of Granger's shirt. The wreckage matched a pickup truck that had disappeared the same night as Granger. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police officially declared Granger dead. He didn't go to space after all. He took a truck up a mountain and exploded in a fireball of dynamite. If aliens visited you in your dreams and invited you on an intergalactic journey, would you say yes? Let us know what you would do in the comments below. And while you're at it, subscribe. Number 3. The Ghost Train. On July 14, 1911, a Zanetti company packed a luxury train full of local celebrities and wealthy passengers. There were 108 people on board the Italian train when it departed from the station in Rome. It should have arrived in Milan a few hours later, but it never did. The train entered a tunnel and never came out the other side. And those who witnessed the train enter the tunnel said they saw a strange fog inside, and a sudden sharp hum filled the air. In the weeks, months, and the years that followed, a spectral train was seen here and there around the tunnel. Locals believed the train had somehow slipped into a parallel dimension and got lost in time. Some even said the ghost train was on its way straight to hell. There isn't much in the way of evidence that the story is true. There are no records of a train that disappeared from Rome to Milan, and there's nothing to suggest the train ever existed except strange rumors and unconfirmed reports. The ghost train supposedly reappeared on an evening in 1955 on a random set of tracks outside Crimea, Ukraine. A random steam engine locomotive appeared from the early 1900s with no people on it. But after the patrolman went for help and came back to check on the train, it was gone. It was as if it had never been there at all. Number 2. The SS Cotopaxi. The SS Cotopaxi disappeared almost 100 years ago in the Bermuda Triangle on November 29, 1925. The ship set sail from Charleston in South Carolina with a small crew of about 32 men. The ship was carrying a cargo of coal bound for Havana, Cuba, but as it sailed through the Bermuda Triangle, it disappeared into thin air. And nobody saw the Cotopaxi or any of its crew members again. In the decades that came after its vanishing, myths and ghost stories spread like a plague. People believed the Cotopaxi was taken by an alien ship, but others said it was dragged into the depths of the ocean by a sea monster. Any kind of crazy explanation you can think of, somebody has already suggested it. The strange stories continued until in 2020 when divers discovered the wreckage of the SS Cotopaxi. After 95 years, the mythical ship reappeared. It was discovered off the coast of St. Augustine, Florida. In an interview with Smithsonian Magazine, Michael Barnett with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration said it was an incredibly exciting discovery. He then went on to say it was one of the greatest dives to a shipwreck he'd ever completed. The wreckage of the ship is only a few dozen feet from the shoreline. It's likely that the ship got stuck in a tropical storm, which caused it to sink. It was never slurped into a wormhole or abducted by aliens. The Cotopaxi couldn't see where it was going and smashed onto some rocks, resulting in the tragic deaths of all those on board. It's currently sitting at the bottom of the ocean in a place called Bear Wreck, and even though it's so close to land, the Cotopaxi was still extremely difficult to find. Marine biologists looked through things like insurance paperwork and historical documents to retrace the exact route the ship took. And those documents led them to the SS Cotopaxi's final resting place. Number 1. Santiago Flight 513. On September 4, 1954, Santiago Airlines Flight 513 took off from the city of Aachen in West Germany. The flight was destined to land in Porto Alegre, Brazil, 18 hours later, but instead the flight took 35 years to complete. The airplane vanished from all radar systems and lost contact with air traffic controllers as it steered over the Atlantic Ocean. Then, on October 12, 1989, a mysterious plane appeared out of nowhere above the Porto Alegre airport. The mystery airplane showed up out of nothing, materializing like a phantom, and after it landed on the tarmac, the plane just sat there idling. When airport authorities pried the door open, they found 92 skeletons sitting in their seats with their belt buckles on. And in the cockpit, the skeletal remains of Captain Miguel Victor Curie were strapped into the pilot's seat. The skeleton's hands were reportedly clutching the controls as if it had just landed the plane. Even though everyone inside was dead and decayed, the engine still hummed. It was as if the people on the flight had been reduced to skeletons in the minutes that the plane sat on the tarmac. This is a tough story for many people to believe because of where it comes from. The tale of Santiago Flight 513 appeared in Weekly World News in 1989, the same tabloid newspaper that published the story of PanAm Flight 914, which also vanished and reappeared. It's like the editors at the paper know something the rest of us don't. Either that or they're just making all the stories up. Do you think it's possible that airplanes are being sucked into time warps? Could the tabloids be telling the truth about disappearing and reappearing planes? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.